Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you one more time to Landing Place. It's great to have you here. Whether you're here live, online, podcast, streaming, we're in episode 3 of a 4-part series called Resolving Everyday Conflict. Because we have conflict every single day. Maybe at work, it may be at home, it may be parent to child, it may be in your neighborhood, it may be driving in traffic. We all encounter conflict all the time. And I got bad news and good news about conflict. The bad news is we're not very good at it. Have you noticed that? We're just not very good. And when I say we, I don't mean just church. I mean like society is not very good at resolving conflict. But I even think even within the church, we're not great at resolving conflict. But the good news is this. The good news is we can get better. Resolving everyday conflict is a learned skill that every single one of us can learn how to do better. And frankly, if I'm really honest with you, no one is inherently good at it. No one is born being able to resolve conflict super easily. It is an absolutely learned skill. So we've been learning together over the last 2 weeks, and we have 2 more weeks, how to resolve everyday conflicts so much better than we're currently doing. And this is a series that catches everybody because we all engage in conflict. We all run into people that are just we think are hard to get along with, and we're just not sure how to navigate. And some of you are believers in God, and you trust God's word. For some of you, you're sort of just checking out faith. Maybe you came with family today. Maybe you came with somebody else, a friend, and you're just sort of investigating faith. But here's what I can tell you. If you'll apply God's principles to conflict, whether you believe in God or not, the principles will still work. And I would even encourage you, if you're seeking out, is there anything to this faith thing? I would encourage you to put God's principles into practice and let Him prove to you that there's a better way to do things. Now, as a pastor, we're a lightning rod for conflict, all right? We deal with a lot of people's conflict, so people come in conflicted, and we have to mediate sometimes. But just being a church, people take up conflict with us all the time. We get conflict on theological issues. We get conflict on political issues. We get conflict on social issues. We get conflict on pretty much everything, and then sometimes it's really, really narrow. Like, I didn't like the second song at service today. It's a little too hot, it's a little too cold, it's a little too loud, it's a little too soft. I don't like your clothes. I don't know why you're wearing those shoes. Your hair is too long. All of these things. These are just, people just feel free to engage in conflict all the time. Now, not all conflict is bad. In fact, there's some conflict we absolutely welcome. I love to passionately debate theological issues with people. I really do. Like, that is an enjoyable thing for me when it's done well. What I found is a lot of people just don't do it very well at all. But every now and then you run across somebody who does it incredibly well. And when they do, it's like a breath of fresh air. You go, oh my goodness, somebody actually gets this. So about 2 years I had an incident. A woman from church stopped me after church and goes, hey, I really would love to meet with you this week. And I'm like, absolutely. Thursday afternoon works well for me. We set a time up. She came into the office. She sits down, and this is somebody I've known for probably at this stage, solid 10 years, thinking we have a good relationship. She sits down and says to me, I have something really hard to tell you. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you're sick. Oh my goodness, you're dying. And she goes, I've been carrying an offense around for about the last 2 years toward you. I'm like, oh, well, that's good news. I thought you were dying. This we can solve. And I said, hey, and being that super high emotional quotient kind of guy that I am, in touch with my feelings, I have no clue. Like, I sense nothing between us that's bad. Like, no bad mojo, no nothing, which is why when people say, hey, how are you and Karen doing, my wife, I'll say, you might want to ask her, because I think things are going great, but I tend to be an overly optimistic person in general, so if you really want to get the real scoop, just ask her. So I said, hey, what's going on? I mean, that's a long time to carry something, and it stemmed back from a decision that we made as a church about a video, oddly enough. So she was working in a nonprofit ministry outside of Landing Place that Landing Place supported, and they had put together a promotional video. And the promotional video was to help further their cause in their nonprofit. And the question came up to us is, Landing Place, would you show this video in your service? as a promotion for our ministry, our nonprofit. I looked at the video and I thought, nope. Didn't love the video. There were things I didn't love about the video. Thought, this could be too harsh. Let me take it to somebody else. I happened to have a pastor's meeting that day. And I went, I showed the video to a couple of my pastor friends of mine of local churches. And they were all like, oh, no, you don't want to show that video. So I came back to the leader of their ministry and said, yeah, we're not using the video. Good luck if you want to use it. That's great. This person happened to be in the video and have a pretty prominent role in the video. And so for the last 2 years, I've been sort of holding this against you. Like I don't understand why you made the decision, and I felt a number of things when you said that. She did so many things so well. She had really thought out what she wanted to say, and then she goes, it made me feel like you don't like me. It made me feel like you don't validate me. It made you feel like I started to write the story in my mind about our relationship that I didn't like. And I've been kind of sitting on it for 2 years and harboring it, and I feel like it's really time to come and tell you about it. I'm like, well, I'm so glad you did. Like that. None of the story that you just wrote is true. Let me explain myself. And we were able to kind of resolve that conflict and move forward. And I actually officiated her wedding yesterday, and so I think we're good. And we seem to be good. But it's so rare. It is so rare that somebody approaches conflict. She did step 3 in conflict amazingly well. And some of you going, Mark, I wasn't here in the last 2 weeks. I missed step 1 and step 2. Let me read you a verse. And then we're going to start talking about 3 steps in conflict. The verse comes from Galatians. It's a letter that Paul wrote to a church plant. They were in conflict. And he wrote these words, and this is going to kind of introduce step 3 in the process. He said, "Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. And be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself." Let's go back and review. When we're in conflict, God gives us 4 steps. The order on these steps in resolving conflict is so crucial, I can't even overemphasize it. The first step we talked about in week 1 is when we're in the middle of conflict, we have to stop. Before we write that text, before we send that email, before we fire back something we're going to regret, we're going to stop and we're going to go higher. We're going to go to God and we're going to say, hey, God, Holy Spirit who lives inside of me, in-house counsel, what should I do in this situation? How should I respond? Stopping gives you a moment to get that conflict that just hit you from the emotional part of your brain into the logical part of your brain. There's a lag. Everything that hits you comes into the emotional part of your brain first, and we tend to respond emotionally, which is almost never good. If we give it just a minute and seek some counsel from God, we allow that emotion to get to the logical part and go, if I responded this way, it would probably do this. If I responded this way, it would probably go this direction. I think I want to respond this way. We're going to stop and go higher. It's one thing most of us just don't do. We tend to react. We tend to respond. The second week, Eric talked about getting real and owning our own stuff. In every conflict, you may think the other person is 100% at fault and you are 0% at fault, but that's not true. In every conflict, there's a their part and a my part. You can ascribe whatever percentage you think is theirs, but the truth is we have to own our part first before we ever go to them and talk to them about their part. That is so incredibly critical that we own our part. And Eric just did a great job of talking about owning his part. Now, we get to week 3, and this is what she did so incredibly well, and that is this. Week 3 is we're going to gently engage. How are we going to engage? Gently. Gently is a key word in the statement. We want to engage them, but we want to do it gently. We're going to gently engage them on what their part of the conflict is. The big idea for today is this. We want to gently engage rather than enrage. All right, when we tend to respond emotionally, we tend to escalate the conflict. We tend to make it worse. We tend to enrage them, which doesn't resolve the conflict at all. It just makes it worse. So in this step, we're going to bring things down a little bit. We're going to gently engage. Now, the problem for most of us is we like to do this step, number 3, on number 1, and not gently. We typically want to respond. We're angry. We want to let them know how we feel, and we just come at them and say, well, you did this and you did that, and if you wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have had to respond this way. We typically want to engage as step number 1, and it's actually step number 3. And when we get these out of order, things really get messed up. And that's one of the reasons we're not very good at resolving conflict. We don't go higher, we don't own our stuff before we come and gently engage them. So today we're going to talk about how do we gently engage someone. You've been in conflict. You know there's a rift between the two of you. How do we take that next step after we've prayed about it, after we've gotten some counsel from the Holy Spirit, after we've owned our own stuff? Now, how do we go now? I want to talk to you about your side of this. I want to answer 3 questions. I call them rules of engagement. 3 questions. The first question is, when do we gently engage? Timing is everything we're going to learn. Why do we gently engage? What's the end goal here? And then the hard part is, how do we do this? How do we do this really well? And here's what I promise you. If you get this down and you do this well, your life will be better. Nobody likes to live a life full of conflict. Nobody likes to carry conflict around with them. Nobody likes, if you've ever been in a really contentious relationship, it just eats your lunch every day. You can't stop thinking about it. We have an opportunity to fix this. So the first question is this: when do I engage someone? Now, we talked in week 1 that because God forgives us, we have an amazing option in the middle of a conflict. And the option is to overlook. And I'm going to be honest with you, there's a lot of conflicts you just need to overlook. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. You're never going to see this person again, unless you see them every day on your commute. They cut you off, and you could get really angry, and you could send all sorts of hand gestures and signals and cut them off and speed up and just engage in this really aggressive behavior. Or you can just decide, you know what, this isn't worth conflicting about. I'm going to overlook this. You go ahead and go in, man. I'm going to overlook it. A lot of conflict in life simply needs to be just simply overlooked. You know what? We don't need to deal with that. But we talked in week 1, there are some things that we don't overlook. There are some things that absolutely need to be engaged in conversation. 4 things. The first is this: when it damages my relationship with this person. This woman who came to approach me for 2 years, she was feeling every time she saw me, this was riling up inside of her. It was damaging the relationship between her and me. Not on my part, because I was clueless, but on her part. And so she said, hey, we need to resolve this because I don't have good feelings about you right now, and I'm not going to have good feelings about you until we have a conversation around this. So you know. And it was good. I'm like, that's great. I would have never known otherwise. The second thing is this: when it hurts somebody. When the behavior, there's a pattern of behavior where somebody is continually hurting somebody else, or maybe you're in a relationship where somebody is doing something in that relationship that is continually either hurting you or somebody else, and there's this pattern that just isn't going away. And they may be aware of it and they may not be aware of it. We have to have a conversation around that. The third is when it actually hurts the offender themselves. There are some times where people are truly, like I was, absolutely clueless. Like they don't see it. People have blind spots. Let's get personal. We have blind spots. I have blind spots, and you have blind spots. There are things that you do and things that you say, and that you don't think are bad, and you don't think are offensive, and you don't think people take offense to, but they do. And sometimes you just need somebody really honest to come alongside you and go, hey, I know you probably don't even recognize this, but like when you say this or you do this or you engage in this behavior, it's really not a good thing. That's a good friend who will do that too for you. The last thing is this: when the level of behavior actually is significantly dishonoring God, I would just say this rises to a level of sin. When somebody's engaged in a straight up sinful behavior, particularly if they're a believer, and they're involved in something they probably know they shouldn't be involved in, sometimes as a good friend, you want to come alongside them and go, hey, I'm not your judge, and I'm not being mean. I just need you to know that, man, your decisions right now are going to lead you a place you don't want to be. And we get involved in a lot of those situations here. Now, I know that some of you would go back to Jesus' teaching in Matthew 7 and go, hey, Mark, I've read this. It says, do not judge, or you will be judged. So who am I to have a conversation with anybody about anything? I want to dig a little deeper because that is in direct conflict with a number of things, other things that Jesus said. I think that was a very specific context about who we judge, how we judge. Confronting someone and gently engaging them is different than judging them. I can gently, the woman who engaged me did not judge me. She simply engaged and said, hey, when you did this, it made me feel this way. That was really helpful. Last week, Eric talked about the story about, hey, before you go address anything in your neighbor's eye, you got a big old log in your eye you need to take out first. That's why there's an order to this. It says, remove the log from your own eye so that you can now address the speck that's in your neighbor's eye. It doesn't say don't address it. It just says, oh, you need to get the right order. You need to own your stuff first. Now you're ready to go and have a gentle conversation about their stuff. If you don't believe that, Jesus said this in Matthew 18:15. If another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. Interesting, both Paul and Jesus address sinful behavior. But what about non-sinful behavior? Me saying no to the video was not a sinful behavior. In fact, it's a decision I would make again. I think it was the right call, but it was still offensive to her. And that goes back to when do we engage? Sometimes we do engage when sin's involved, but a lot of times we need to engage just when we're carrying something. We need to go like, our relationship is broken until we have a conversation about this. Our relationship is broken until we resolve this particular conflict. Absolutely when sin's involved. But there are times you're going to need to gently engage even when sin is not involved. Now, that's the first question. The first question is when. The second question is why. Why do we gently engage? And it's important to have the right motives here. In week 1, we introduced the word peacemaking. And attached to the word peacemaking is a word reconciling. It's not a word we use in English a lot. Reconciling just simply means restoring harmony. My goal in sitting down to someone and having a gentle engagement about their behavior in a conflict is for no other reason than to try to restore harmony. And it's really important to know that. It's not about being right. It's not about saying, see, I was right, you were wrong. Let me show you exactly where you were wrong. Let me show you how you were wrong. Let me show you when you were wrong. It isn't about that at all. Our whole motive going in is to restore harmony and make peace. And we go in with that attitude, it changes everything. Great resource on this. If you find yourself in a lot of conflict and you find yourself struggling, Ken Sande wrote a book called Peacemaker. Phenomenal book. A lot of the series comes out of some of the research done. He just simply took almost every part of conflict that's found in the Bible and put it in a single resource to help us get better at this. And if you want to get better, this is a wonderful resource to take it even further and to unpack some of these principles around conflict resolution. The Greek from Galatians, when he said, hey, I want you to help that person get back on the right track. The Greek there, if you go back to the original language, means to mend, means to repair, to make useful again. I want to make this relationship useful again. I want to repair this relationship. I want to mend this relationship. My goal in this conflict and having a conversation is not to increase the conflict. It's actually to reduce the conflict. It's to have a really, really good conversation around it. Jesus addresses church people in Matthew 5, 23, 24. Eric read this last week. We'll read it this week. We're going to read it again next week. So if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar at the temple, all right, you know what he's talking? When you're sitting in church, modern day language. If you're sitting in church at Landing Place Church today, or you're listening to me today, and you remember that someone has something against you, you're in the middle of conflict, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Get up from your seat, walk out these doors, and be reconciled to that person. Then come back and offer your sacrifice to God. Paul said, man, this is actually Jesus talking, sorry. Don't come in here and try to get your worship on when you've got unresolved conflict out there that you haven't dealt with. It's that important. He said, you know what? It's more important than you coming in and singing songs and listening to a message. Actually, if you know there's a problem out there that exists, it's incumbent upon you to take the first step, even if you feel like you are 100% right and the other person is 100% wrong. He says, as a believer, I want you to take the initiative. I want you to go. I want you to own your part, and I want you to engage them in their part. Huge deal. That is the why. Now the real question is how. How do we do this well? Because obviously most people don't do this well. some principles here that this woman who engaged me in conversation, she did all three of these things incredibly well. The first thing is we meet privately, face to face. Matthew 18:15, I'll read it again. If another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. We praise people publicly. We confront them privately. Have you ever been called out in a group setting? Maybe you're on a team. Maybe you're in a staff meeting, a work organization where somebody like a boss called you out and berated you and just ran you down in front of the group. It's humiliating. It's frustrating. It only increases the level of anxiety around it. Jesus goes, don't do that. Praise publicly. But if you're going to have a conversation with somebody about something difficult, you go face to face and you go one-on-one to start with. We can escalate from there if we need to. Something happened 15 years ago that I believe changed the face of conflict forever. Anybody remember what happened in 2007? 2007, the first iPhone came out. Now, this is the first iPhone. This changed the way human beings communicate. This changed the way human beings conflict. This changed everything. Now, I'm not down on technology. I'm not down on phones. It just changed things. Before 2007, if we had an issue, we talked face to face. Hey, let's talk. Let's resolve this. After 2007, and it probably started a little before, but this proliferated electronic communication. Now, I'm conflict averse, so we're not meeting. I'm going to send you a really nasty email. I'm going to send you a really nasty text. I'm going to post something about you on social media. It changed how we conflict. And now we have an entire generation, my kids' age, they're afraid to have any face-to-face conversations. They're completely immersed in electronic communication now. I think electronic communication is great when you're conveying information. When is the meeting? 7 o'clock. Great, I'll be there. Beautiful line of communication. The minute it turns to conflict, I can't tell you how strongly I recommend you get off of written and you get onto verbal, ideally face-to-face. Why? Because you get no tone of voice, you get no body expressions, you get no cues as somebody's talking. It sounds a lot different when you're in conflict in written because you read stuff into it. You know they're already mad, and so now you read the text as if they're mad. And it may take on a whole different I have couples that actually sit in the same house, and they will send me, did you see what he texted me? I can't believe she texted this to me. I'm like, why are you texting when you're in the same house? And why are you sending it to me? Why don't you just put your phone down for a minute and face each other on the couch and go, hey, we need to talk about this. I think we need to resolve some of this. And it's just important to know that we live in a society today and there's something about being behind a screen that emboldens people in conflict. I don't know why. But we say things written that we would probably never, honestly, and shouldn't ever have the guts to say to somebody face to face. But we have no problem writing it, posting it. And so I would just encourage you, when it comes to this kind of thing, and you've got some conflict, and you know it's going to be conflictual, you know the stakes are high, you know that emotions run strong, you know that this is a big deal, I would encourage you to say, hey, let's just sit and talk about this. Let's go ahead and resolve this. I promise you it will work better than not doing that. The second thing that she did really well was this. You want to carefully plan what you're going to say. It was clear in retrospect after she left my office, I thought, wow, she had this thing really, really well planned out. She had it scripted. She came in very contrite. She came in very hey, it's going to be really hard. She oriented it really nice with nice things, and then here's the thing we need to fight about. Beautiful job of planning. Really did. Really just did a nice job. We want to carefully plan our words. There's ways to gently confront somebody, and there's a way to really not gently confront. We want to use I statements. Hey, when this happened, I felt this way. I felt like you didn't like me. I felt that you didn't respect my work. I felt like this. Wonderful statements to make, as opposed to when you did this, if you wouldn't have done that. It's totally different. We want to carefully plan our words. Solomon, the wisest guy in the world other than Jesus Christ himself, had a lot to say about the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18:20 said this, wise words satisfy like a good meal. The right words bring satisfaction. Proverbs 12:18, some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. So if you're going to go into a conversation where you're going to gently confront somebody on their part of the conflict, your goal is, how do I craft my words to bring healing and satisfaction? That's the target on the wall. If I walk out of here and we don't have healing and satisfaction, I probably need to own my part of, I didn't maybe pick the right words. Now, you can pick the best words and some people aren't going to respond well. I get that. But for the most part, our choice of words and tone and body language are huge in resolving conflict. Carefully plan your right words. The last thing she did incredibly well was this. We want to listen for understanding. When she got done kind of walking through, hey, here's what happened, here's how I felt, here's the hurt that I felt, she said, I know you probably didn't intend any of that. Tell me how you saw this. I'm like, wow. First of all, I'm so sorry because none of the decision that I made was meant to hurt you. And I don't know how that happened. Let me tell you behind the decision. When I saw the video, I didn't love it. I didn't get a great feel. I didn't feel like it represented your organization well. I didn't really feel like it represented you as well as maybe, I saw it from maybe a different perspective. I said, I wasn't sure because I thought maybe it's just me. So I actually showed it to a couple other pastor friends who were outside of our church just to make sure it just wasn't me. And they all agreed, this probably isn't something that we would play on a weekend. And maybe not even to use as promotional at all. But let me explain to you why we made that decision and what I saw in this video that I don't think maybe you see. And as we had that conversation, she's like, oh, I never even thought about it from that perspective. Like I didn't, wow, okay, yeah. Man, that totally is a different story than I had in my head. And then I said, you know what I did really poorly is I communicated very poorly on the why. What I could have done better, what I should have done better, I should have sat down and had this conversation 2 years ago as opposed to just saying, no, we're not going to use the video. So I'll absolutely own that part. I'm so sorry that you were hurt, and I'm so sorry that I hurt you because I can tell that it did. She listened for understanding. James said this, be quick to listen, slow to speak, be slow to get angry. That's like a refrigerator verse, one that should go on your car, refrigerator, your bathroom mirror, in your back pocket, like everywhere. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. You want to resolve conflict? Man, these are 3 great steps. Meet with them privately, face to face. Then we're going to choose our words really, really carefully. But then we're going to listen for understanding and try to get a better perspective of their side of this particular conflict. And I almost always find that when I do this, I get a whole different perspective. And I'm like, you know what? I didn't see it from that direction at all. And I'm so sorry. Like I see where all of a sudden this thing just escalated. Most conflicts at the root have a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication in them, is what I found. We misinterpret things. We hear a bit of a story and we begin to write our own story that may or may not be true at all. Most of us aren't very good listeners. We just aren't. Most of us, as somebody else is talking, we're just waiting our turn to rebut what they're going to say, like a good defense attorney. We're trying to find something that they say to use against them in our next line. And what they're saying is, what James is saying is, you know what? Just really listen. Really hear what they're trying to say, because if you do, you're probably going to find the root of that. And when I think about God's relationship with us, that's exactly what he does to us. God listens to us. And when we mess up and we go to him and go, hey, man, I messed this up. He's incredibly quick to forgive. He's incredibly quick to just say, hey, it's okay. Give me another chance tomorrow. Give you another shot at this thing. But what happens when you have kind of a crucial conversation with someone and they don't respond well at all? Because that's going to happen. And that's why we have a 4th week of the series. Next week, we talk about, hey, what happens when this thing just doesn't go well? When they, even after you've done your level best in steps 1, 2, and 3 to follow everything that God has said, there's going to be some folks who just aren't in a place to receive right then. And how do we proceed forward from there? That's what we're going to talk about next week. So let me close this episode in prayer. Then I'm going to give you 2 questions to consider as we wrap up today. God, we're so grateful for the truth of your word, and we're grateful for these principles that we can apply to our conflict. And God, we just admit right now we're not very good at this. We tend to escalate, we tend to react, we tend to confront anything but gently and humbly. And God, we confess to you that we've probably been responding poorly to a lot of conflict. And we own that. And we ask your forgiveness for that. But God, we also pray for strength to do better. God, I know there's some people who are in deep conflict right now, today. Maybe between husband and wife, maybe between parent and child, maybe with a coworker or neighbor or a classmate. God, I pray that we would take these principles from your word and we'll apply them to our life, because God, when we do, God, we just know that it's going to turn out better, because you're so much smarter than we are. You're so much wiser than we are. You know things that we don't know. And so God, we just press into you today. I know it's hard to do this, so God, I pray that you'd give us the strength to maybe have difficult conversations this week that we've been putting off, that we've been avoiding, we haven't wanted to get involved in. Holy Spirit, will you just give us the strength and the power to really approach this from the right direction? We love you and we thank you and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.